Welcome to the Financial Advisor Success Podcast, where you go behind the scenes with financial planner, speaker, and consultant Michael Kitces to hear stories of how leading financial advisors navigated the inevitable challenges that arise on the path to success, and get insight from leading industry consultants about how to break through to the next level in your advisory business. And now here's your host, Michael Kitces.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the 391st episode of the Financial Advisor Success Podcast. My guest on today's podcast is Christopher Jones. Chris is the founder of Sparrow Wealth Management, an RIA based in Orlando, Florida, that oversees approximately $110 million in assets under management for 68 client households. What's unique about Chris, though, is how he has built a highly efficient solo practice that allows him to work fewer than 25 hours per week to have more time for his family and manage to cut his hours down by relentlessly focusing on only the financial planning tasks that really, truly matter most to his clients, and then either outsourcing or just eliminating the rest. In this episode, we talk in depth about how Chris's efficient planning process works, including how he works through clients' financial plans collaboratively during annual meetings and then just sends them a final copy afterwards instead of conducting a lot of time-intensive plan preparation in advance. How Chris used to do in-depth cash flow analyses with his clients, but now saves time by simply focusing in on clients' stated goals instead. And how Chris further cuts down the time needed to manage cash requests from client accounts by not withdrawing his clients' retirement spending needs on a monthly or ad hoc basis, but instead simply doing one single sizable annual distribution from their portfolio all at once in January to cover them for the entire year. We also talk about how Chris has improved the efficiency of his practice by building a carefully curated tech stack, deliberately using the specialized features of a range of best-in-class AdvisorTech products rather than pursuing an all-in-one solution. How Chris saves time by purposely choosing not to automate certain tasks and deliberately updates client balances for their annual reviews manually each year instead of using account aggregation tools. And how Chris's decision to transition away from using customized Excel spreadsheets he created himself and instead use a tech stack made up of third-party software tools helped him serve wealthier clients, driving his AUM from barely $40 million to more than $100 million in just 8 years. And be certain to listen to the end, where Chris shares how he has grown his firm with a focus on generating referrals from clients who are well connected in their professional fields. The way Chris managed the transition from operating an in-person office to running a remote practice, which allowed him to move across the country to be closer to family while still continuing to grow. And how Christopher compensates for his self-acknowledged perfectionist tendencies by choosing to outsource tasks which he knows he would want to find the perfect solution and instead just allowing someone else to get it done and saving him time and reducing his anxiety in the process. And so with that introduction, I hope you enjoy this episode of the Financial Advisor Success Podcast with Chris Jones. Welcome, Christopher Jones, to the Financial Advisor Success Podcast.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
I really appreciate you joining us today, and I'm looking forward to a conversation around what I kind of think of as the dynamics of how we build our practices, or like how we figure out what kind of practice we want to build. There's a bunch of different playbooks out there in the industry of how to build a $100 million firm, how to build a $1 billion firm, how to build a lifestyle practice, like all these sort of different playbooks out there, and I feel like there's an irony to it that it sort of presumes out of the gate you actually know which thing you want to go build in the first place, which some of us don't know, and some of us think we do know, and then we start building it, and then we find out that's not actually a thing that we wanted in the first place, and then we have to shift and pivot. And so to me, there's this natural interlocking of navigating, like figuring out what we want to create for our practices and figuring out what we're just trying to create for our lives, or like do on this earth as a human being with the time that we've got. And I know you've had an interesting journey around this, culminating in at least what I would call like an incredibly successful lifestyle practice around you. I don't even know if that's a label that you would use, but I know that has been a journey unto itself. And so I'm excited to talk about these dynamics, like how you build a really effective practice around the life that you're trying to live, and then just run it efficiently in today's modern world.
Yeah, thanks. It's very interesting to me as well, and it's been quite the journey.
So I think to get us started, just help us understand your advisory firm as it exists today. So we've got a little bit of a mental image of what the business is, and then we can talk a little bit more about the path and journey in getting here and making it what it is.
Okay. Well, today I live in Orlando, Florida. I work from my home. My only employee is my wife, and her name is Naz. And, she works with me in that capacity. And we currently manage about 110 million, Mike. We have 68 clients. Our average AUM per client is about 1.6 million. And my average client tenure is about 10 years.
Okay. And how long has the business been running overall? Just like a average tenure
Yeah.
of 10 years. You've been doing this for a while.
Yeah, 23 years. So I started it in April 2001, and we're just at about the 23-year mark now.
So what does this look like, I guess, from a, a fee structure end or revenue wise?
Well, our fee structure is sort of twofold. We have a fixed planning fee that we charge. It's typically on average around $3,000 a year for clients that have under $3 million in assets. Once a client hits $3 million, then we waive that planning fee. But
Okay.
we also have an investment fee as well. And on the first $3 million, it's 0.75%, so 0.75%. And then from 3 to 5 million, it drops 50% to 0.5%. And then on assets over 5 million, it's 0.25%. So it's a pretty simple fee structure that I would say captures the bulk of the revenue on the first 5 million of assets. And it really incentivizes, I would say, larger clients to stay with us. One of my personal, I guess, more painful experiences is losing some very large clients. I had a $20 million client that I lost, and we can talk about that later, how that happened. But clients, as they get bigger, get heavily targeted by all the big banks. And so it gets challenging, with all the competition at that point to keep them. And so I have a fee structure that really heavily incentivizes clients to not go wandering around.
Meaning, like once you get past that certain base level, you're up to a $5 million client. By the time you're at a $5 million client, you got more than enough dollars to cover the relationship for
Yes.
yourself, and the marginal dollar fee drops off to
Exactly.
25 basis points. So it's hard for a big bank with a quote unquote standard fee schedule. They just get very, very expensive on a relative basis for a client you can serve
Exactly.
efficiently.
The client has to question, is it really worth paying double or triple the fee to get access to some of these perks that banks want to, throw around? So
And I guess on the baseline end, a $3,000 planning fee and 75 basis points on the first few million. If I just sort of think about the traditional $1 million client, a 75 basis point fee plus a $3,000 planning fee, you actually add up to right about $10,000 on a $1 million client. Like it's effectively like a net rate of 1%. But you broke it apart into planning fee plus slightly lower investment fee.
Yes, and that was very intentional. Because when I first developed this fee, it was closer to like 2,000, so it was slightly under 1% on a $1 million client. But obviously, as they get bigger, as they get into the 2 and 3 million range, let's just say 2 million range, it's well below 1% when you average it out. And so that was kind of my goal. My goal was to have a fee structure that was generally lower than the average, but that got much lower than the average as the client assets increased.
So, out of curiosity, how do you explain and talk to the client about that? Because I mean, I can envision a world where they balk at a $3,000 planning fee plus the investment fee, and you're like, well, if you add them all together, it's still a similar 1%. I can also envision a world where you look very, very competitive on the investment end because you're only 75 basis points when a lot of other people charge $1 million. It's like, oh, and there's also a little planning fee, but people sort of shake that off because they're focused on the AUM fee being only 75 basis points. Putting only in air quotes. So, so like, how do you explain and talk through that with clients, or just where do they raise questions or ask about the fees when you present a structure like this?
Well, to be really honest, at this point, the clients that I'm targeting, this is a complete non-issue. In fact, my fee structure is much lower than most who are, and I don't have an official minimum, Mike, but I do actively, kind of promote the idea that I'm not generally working with people that are clients that are under 2 million. And that's a fairly recent development. So I migrated to this particular fee structure, I think around 10 years ago. I think it was in 2015, so I've actually had it for a while. But at the time that I migrated to this fee structure, I was starting to work with a lot of Henrys, high income,
Okay. Yeah.
kind of lower asset clients. I started taking on a lot of young doctors. In fact, I had one in particular, he knows who he is, who referred me quite a few of his friends from medical school. And these were a lot of, they were early in their practice as doctors. And
Right.
so I
Good
needed
old fashioned AUM minimums don't work. Like they're
yes,
student loans to pay down and still getting income going. Like they can't fit that model, but they
right.
make enough to pay you advice
Yeah.
fees.
So the advice fee of 3,000 was a complete non-issue for them because they had low asset amounts, usually just a few $100,000. And it's funny how recently this was. I mean, being only 10 years ago, um, but it was the perfect fee structure to attract those type of clients. Because at the time, I actually had a very boutique practice. This was 10 years ago. I only had about 30 to 40 clients, and they were all fairly high net worth clients. I think at the time the average was probably around 2 million, even higher than it is now. And they were mostly getting older. And what I was really concerned about at that point in my career was, how do I diversify my client base? Because I am worried that they're going to start, passing away.
Okay.
And I wanted to also just have a more diverse client base that could grow into, my practice as it matured.
And so that was then a conscious, I'm not going to have an investment minimum, but I need to get paid. So I'm going to institute a fee minimum
Yeah.
that lets me work with Henry's higher earners who don't necessarily have an asset base yet, but I'm going after a segment of doctors because they do tend to have very above average income. So like they can fit my traditional model over time eventually. And the
Yes.
planning fee makes sure I can do this profitably until they get there.
Right. I was intentionally trying to work with younger clients. And at the time I was in my 40s. So I was excited about working with clients that were kind of more my age, who were high income earners, and to diversify my revenue base. And at the time I had around 60 million in assets. And I only had about 30 clients. So I had a very profitable practice, but I felt that it was vulnerable to, loss of big clients. And I just wanted to have more diversity to my client base. So it was a very intentional decision at that stage of my career to attract, higher income clients who would eventually build and grow their assets. And that's exactly what happened. Most of these clients now have several $1 million. And they've been really wonderful clients.
High income professionals who get high quality financial advice early on in their careers tends to work out well for everyone.
Right. And it was also a market that hadn't been served well. And I almost feel like we're taking the cart before the horse here, but I will say that this was all due to the fintech revolution and my ability to actually, for the first time in my career, serve these clients efficiently. And that's what the fintech revolution did for my business. It allowed me to be a lot more efficient because I couldn't have worked with these clients before.
So I want to come back to the efficiency discussion, or really the tech discussion in a moment. But
Yep.
first, just I want to kind of understand the rest of the picture of the business. So,
Mm-hmm.
So do you share revenue of like what this adds up to with 68 clients, 100 million, and the planning fees and the break points? Like, where does this land for you?
This year, it'll probably be somewhere between 850 and 900 in revenue.
So I guess sort of two things. What does service process look like for clients? I feel like a lot of us, when we talk about what we do for clients, it's basically
Mm-hmm.
what do we do for new clients and the whole new client financial planning process. But it sounds like that's not actually the bulk of your clients and work at this point.
Right.
Because most are long-term clients. So what does the ongoing service model look like?
Well, the ongoing service model for me in a very mature practice, which I have, would be meeting with most clients on average once a year. We call it an annual review. A large percent of my clients are retired, probably over 60% of them. And so especially for retirees who have been with me on average 10 years, they're really familiar with this process. And it's a very efficient process that I do very little preparation for because I do it almost entirely in the meeting itself. Since I do it and I'm very familiar with the software, I don't need any type of paraplanner. I literally, we send them out. First, we do all the scheduling using Calendly. So it's very automated. The client actually schedules themselves. We have a process where And this is what my wife does. She goes through and uses Redtail to figure out which clients are coming up within the next month or two. So about 2 months ahead, we send everyone out an automated email that reminds them, hey, it's time to schedule your annual review. And then they go into Calendly, they schedule it. I usually have my calendar only schedulable for 2 months at a time. And so we remind them, hey, time to schedule your meeting. They schedule it. Then as soon as they schedule it, she sends them out, again, a sort of email through Redtail that provides them with a document that they can complete to update us on everything that's changed in the last year. Kind of similar to like tax preparation documents where they send you out an organizer. We do that kind of thing too. It's a very short document which they can fill out online.
So what's tell me more about this document. It's like what's in it? What do you ask? How deep do you go?
We don't go very deep. We mainly ask for them to let us know. It's actually a very simple document. What changes have occurred in the last year, and kind of giving them, ticklers for what those changes might be. Have you moved? Are you thinking about moving? What are the things that you really want to talk about? What's on your mind? And then reminding them to make sure that we have their updated taxes. Most of our clients have signed a consent form, so their CPA sends us their taxes, but if they haven't done that, they're responsible to get them to us. They usually upload them through our eMoney vault. So they're responsible to get us any documents, any new insurance documents, any new estate planning documents. And then during the meeting, I start almost all my meetings with, tell me what you want to accomplish. What are you thinking about right now? What are you worried about? So that's really how we start. Is I have a process I go through, but I want to know what are the things that you want to make sure we cover in this meeting. And they'll tell me, oh, I'm worried about the markets. I'm worried about this or that. So I prioritize the things they give me over my structured process. We might spend the whole meeting talking about a few items that they wanted to talk about. But usually I try to get through a couple key things. Number one, I have a sort of a template in eMoney that I use that updates their profile, their net worth, basically the kind of observations about their financial situation and any tasks or things that we need to do. And so we complete that document and then they get a copy of it at the end of the meeting. And then we also update their financial plan. And their financial plan we do in Money Guide Pro, and we create basically a snapshot of their financial plan, and that goes in their vault as well. And that's what we try to cover in their annual review meeting, as well as, anything that we need to address, whether it's estate planning issues or tax planning issues or any of the other areas of the financial planning process.
So when you get into this level of eMoney updates, just I want to make sure I understand, like, how does the data get in there and who's inputting it?
Yes, that's a great question. It's a combination of us and them. The way that the software integration I use works, most of the investments, all the investments I manage for a client are in Orion. And Orion, the data from Orion goes into eMoney. So all the accounts I manage flow into eMoney from Orion. And the reason I do it from Orion instead of from, say, the custodian like Fidelity is I do have several custodians. So I consolidate everything in Orion, then everything transfers to eMoney from Orion.
And who are your custodians in practice?
Fidelity, and then I just have literally, a few other odd ones like TIA-CREF, one or two variable annuity companies that are kind of the fee-only type ones that we move variable annuities to that we want to lower fees on.
Okay.
So
Orion essentially becomes your in-house aggregator, as it were.
Yes.
And so then that's got all investment-related balances to pump into eMoney automatically.
Correct.
Okay.
And then when we originally started using eMoney, the ideal, which I always tend to start with, the perfect ideal is for everything to, the client to enter, linking accounts that sync, that automatically update. Everything would automatically update. Now, anyone that uses eMoney probably has learned by now that doesn't work perfectly. And I've gotten to the point that there were really only a few institutions that consistently, with no real issues, synchronize well with eMoney. So we've gotten to the point where clients will link in the big banks, Chase, Wells Fargo, those kind of things, and a lot of their 401k plans that I don't manage. But if anything has trouble reconciling, I have decided I'm not going to be a customer support department for eMoney. And so my approach has been that we enter those manually and we update them once a year, because all I really care about is getting an accurate snapshot of their net worth when we meet. I recommend they use Quicken or other tools to really manage their cash flow.
Oh, interesting. So I'm almost like reading between the lines. Like it's enough work to support clients when the links break that if they're not literally doing it themselves, if they're not using it for their own personal tracking, in which case they tend to fix their own links because they just want to track themselves.
Exactly.
If it's really just for you to do updates, there comes a point where manually getting the data once per year is actually faster and easier than 24/7, 365 support of constantly trying to help clients fix broken links in eMoney.
That is correct. And I can't even tell you the impact this was. This was one of the big changes. I used to have a full-time admin that worked 40 hours a week, who my wife eventually replaced, working 10 hours a week. And do you know what the other 30 hours was mostly devoted to?
Fixing eMoney links.
Yes. It literally was a full-time job. And it was a really big learning when I was like, okay, what can I do to radically improve the efficiency of my company, lower my costs? And who am I doing this for? Am I doing this for the client or for me?
Well, I'm fascinated by the point that you're making here, because I feel like the fundamental answer to anything and everything efficiency related these days is the answer is always technology. It's always automation. It's always like linking more things up and making them more integrated, so everything automatically just flows to where it needs to be. And I know you're a pretty tech savvy guy, so I like really appreciate the irony that like the breakthrough in efficiency was, let's just stop using the tech so much, and then we actually need fewer humans to maintain the tech, and that's the cost savings.
Yes, and do you know how long it takes me to update 2 or 3 accounts that we decided not to link?
Right. Just do you ask them in the intake form, or you just ask them in the meeting and type in a number? And
yeah, depending on the client, how busy they are. Some just do it themselves. They know they come to the meeting with everything updated in eMoney, and they're fine using it on their own
because they log in and fix their own numbers.
Yeah, and then you have the clients who eMoney's always expired. Every time you meet with them, they never log in, and so you know that you're going to be updating those account values. And when you're in the meeting, they're literally on their phone, logging into their account, saying my account value is this, this, and this. And again, that still takes about 2 minutes. 1/100th of the time it takes to keep eMoney links updated.
And so as you update numbers to be able to look at an updated plan for the meeting, are you like printing or PDFing a plan output that's part of the meeting, or are you more of a like put it up on Decision Center, we're just doing it all live?
Yeah, we go through everything, and then eMoney has a sort of a tool that I use that allows me to have an automated sort of report that I've already pre-designed as I update the main things that are in with the report I create from eMoney is the profile, the net worth, the kind of observations they call them, but it's basically like notes about the client, and then tasks, and all those things get created as a PDF while we're in the meeting. We go through it. It's like a presentation, and then we PDF it. It goes right into their vaults. If they ever need to, see it again, it's there for them.
Sorry, I guess it's one nuance I want to make sure I understand. So are you preparing this document beforehand and it becomes the presentation in the meeting, or you're doing the planning work live in the software of the meeting, and the document gets created as like the PDF output collaboratively created by the end of said meeting? Like it's not the meeting talking point. It's the minutes commemorating the meeting.
That is correct. It is the minutes commemorating the meeting, and we are creating it live. And I think that's ultimately where the efficiency of my whole process is so strong, is that I am so comfortable with all the technology that we use that I can do everything live, including the planning work. Almost nothing is done ahead of time, unless I have a really complex financial plan and I have to do some setup work because I know it's going to take me a while to do it.
Someone's got a bunch of options that you don't. I can key the update to your TIACREF account live. I probably don't want to load all your options with 7 tranches live. That gets a little tedious at some point.
Right. Or if I want to just create a couple in addition, additional plans, maybe a life insurance analysis or something. So there's rare cases where I do things ahead of time. Um, and usually in the very first meeting with a new client creating a financial plan, I'll try to do some prep work just to make sure I'm not going to get stuck, because I don't want them sitting there while I'm fiddling around.
Right.
But I can do most things pretty much in real time very quickly.
So you don't even have like a paraplanner
Mm-mm.
second in command that's steering the software. Just you're
No.
someone who's comfortable to steer the software while also doing the client conversation.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't need a paraplanner because I do everything live. And by the way, these meetings rarely take longer than an hour. So we're talking 68 clients, 1 hour per year. You can do the math on that.
Yeah.
And I do have meetings throughout the year with clients, but they're usually about specific issues. We're trying to buy a house. Can we afford this much? So we're using the plan. It's a similar kind of thing where we're doing analytical work. We're just not, it's not a planned meeting. It's something that comes up due to, a question that they have.
Okay. And uh, and so that's it for sort of meeting and ongoing client service work. Is there other stuff you do or try to do through the rest of the year to engage,
Yeah.
stay connected, do other things if you're quote unquote only meeting once a year?
Right. Well, it's kind of like the tip of the iceberg analogy. That's the tip of the iceberg that the client sees. And so, obviously that's not the only work that we're doing. In fact, I would say the bulk of the work, and clients ask this question, like, what else are you doing throughout the year? Well, probably, a third of our time is spent maintaining our education and our knowledge and our understanding of what we need to be doing. But then, all the money management work and the distributions and things like that, I do most client distributions in January. So that type of work, and I do it once a year. I don't do it on a monthly basis like some firms do. I do
I
client
mean,
distributions annually.
so even setting up with clients, like, hey, every year in January,
Hmm.
we'll send out 30 grand or 50 grand or 100 grand or whatever it is.
Yeah.
We'll free up the cash. We'll put it out to your bank account and have fun spending for the coming year. Let me know if you're coming up short.
Yes. My personal view is that it's a lot more secure and just clients feel more comfortable knowing that they have their entire year's worth of money that they need, whatever the difference is between their income and their expenses. This is for retirees, obviously, that they have that money, in their own savings. And then if they need to create a monthly, distribution to themselves, then they can do that from a savings account. But I try to provide them with a year's worth of income at the beginning of the year, in addition to having an emergency fund. And I feel like it allows us to actually take more risk with the rest of their portfolio than you might take otherwise, because they know they have a whole year's worth of income that's already available
Okay.
to them.
Because I was going to ask, right at some point, just the sheer investment nerd of me kicks in of like, don't you sort of create a sizable cash drag if you're pulling that much of cash out and they're holding that long versus like staying more fully invested? So how do you think about that dynamic, or am I overthinking it as I tend to do?
Well, I don't think about it like that because, again, I actually tend to have higher risk levels with the typical portfolio in retirement than I think a lot of advisors do. And that's how I manage it. I think about the cash that they're holding as a cash position in their portfolio that's a safety net, and it gives people a tremendous amount of peace of mind. A lot of people want to hold a lot of cash anyhow. So this just gives them kind of a solid reason that, hey, here's an adequate emergency fund, here's the money you need for the year, and then we're going to have enough in bonds in your portfolio. I like to see them have somewhere between 5 and 10 years worth of distributions in bonds. But aside from that, the majority of my retirees have, I would say the average is around 70% in equities. So I actually keep a higher equity allocation than I think, other advisors do.
Well,
And so I think that makes up for the cash.
I was just going to say, like, 5 to 10 years of distributions in bonds. A lot of clients end up spending something like 3 or 4% from the portfolio. And if I start
Right.
mathing that, you end out somewhere in the neighborhood of 30% in bonds, give or take a little.
Exactly.
It sounds like that really is about where it comes out for you.
That's correct. I do not base risk tolerance on the traditional thing of 50-50, 60-40. I almost have no clients that are 50-50. And my most conservative clients are 60-40. The majority of my retirees are either 70-30 30 or 80/20. And it really depends on their distribution needs. But I have found that giving them a year's worth of cash, part of it is an efficiency thing. So, I I would say from my perspective, it creates a lot of efficiency with how we do things. And then on the other side, I find that clients really like having a year's worth of cash. And I try to help them not worry too much about, the return hit.
Um, I'm struck just in this discussion. I mean, it's another version of things most of us just tend to do naturally as
Mhm.
part of the work we do for the business. Assume that's just a thing, and then like, hey, can we get better tech to make it more efficient? To look at all the client portfolios and find the cash to free up because we're doing distributions every month or every quarter. And you're just kind of coming to the table like, yeah, I just do it once a year in January, and then I don't need tech to make it efficient every month.
Right. Well,
Because I
there's
just
one
don't
other
do
thing.
it every
There's
month.
one other thing. I don't know if all advisors do this, but I do householding, and I'm very personalized about how I manage client investments. And so when I do these distributions, I mean, think of how a lot of advisors do them. They're just probably pulling everything out of the account from the same funds, especially if they've automated it at a brokerage firm. You know, I'm actually householding and I'm rebalancing the portfolio very intentionally to only pull it out of whatever's done the best. So it's a fairly manual process, and I use TRX to do my rebalancing, but I still review everything. So that's more of a starting point. And that's part of the reason I don't like doing it monthly, because, that would be a very tedious process to do that on a monthly basis for everyone.
And just curious, as someone I know likes the tech efficiency, I'm
Hmm.
struck that so you're using TRX for rebalancing,
Yeah.
but Orion
Yes.
for the rest of the portfolio management side. So
Hmm.
why TRX versus Eclipse?
It'd be a lot cheaper to use Eclipse. So many conversations over the years with them when they were developing Eclipse. I just didn't find Eclipse to be better, in my opinion, than TRX. And so when they migrated basically TRX out of Orion, I actually purchased Morningstar just to get TRX. I just like TRX better, and I'm not going to say it's because it's better. It's my own personal preference. I just was not able. I
Are there
felt Eclipse.
particular just like features, reports? Like there's got to be
No,
some. I love
no,
this
yeah,
thing that wins me over.
yeah. It was the methodology. I mean, I felt like the Eclipse methodology. It was more built for account level rebalancing, and they tried to make it work for household level rebalancing, but I don't feel it was designed with that in mind. And the logic of how it rebalances, I just felt wasn't consistent with my own approach. And again, since I do review every single rebalancing, I care a lot about the logic getting me as close as possible to what I would do myself. But I still review it and I still make changes even with TRX.
So meaning like Eclipse would try too hard to draw evenly from multiple accounts instead of just focusing like, hey, we can take all the dollars here and
Yeah,
swap other trades around in another account if we need to get the right dollars to the right place.
right. And I was already using TRX. I used TRX, the whole time I was at Orion, I started with TRX. So there was also
Well,
the
yeah, I mean, TRX was doing rebalancing software before Orion built Eclipse in the first place.
exactly. And I
Okay.
was involved from the very beginning. And I was very excited about it until I started testing it.
Because you really like this household level,
Yeah.
asset located tax placements,
Yes.
tax sensitive
Yes.
liquidations. You're bringing all of that together.
Yeah, and I am kind of a perfectionist. I mean, that's a theme you'll find throughout this. So my big challenge in life is always finding the balance between getting the perfect outcome and efficiency. And most of my early career, I was really bad at that balance because I did everything myself. And it was a huge, huge change for me to migrate to the fintech, software that came in 2015. I had to kind of rebuild my entire practice. But um, but yeah, I think with the TRX thing, I think I still gave in to I really want to keep things, the way I like them. And I just didn't want to change everything to Eclipse. So I'm not even sure there was anything necessarily wrong with Eclipse. I just couldn't get comfortable with it in the time frame I needed to make that decision.
So what else is in the tech stack
Hmm.
to run efficiently then? I think you've said like eMoney for
Yeah.
planning, Orion for the performance reporting and the account aggregation, Redtail was your CRM,
Yep.
TRX is your trading, custody is Fidelity, and the select others where we have to accommodate a one-off client
Yeah.
joins in the business. So what else is in the tech stack to run?
Share file is a fundamental part of it. It holds all of my data and client files and everything. And I mean, as I mentioned, I use MoneyGuide Pro, which integrates with eMoney, and then I use Nitrogen. Interestingly enough, they started as Riskalyze. I still like that word better. And I only use Riskalyze for one thing, and that is to create an investment policy statement. And I used to have a spreadsheet that I still like better, my spreadsheet, that was extremely detailed. I didn't build it. It was built by the very first firm I worked for in Boston, Penny and Schofield. It was basically a spreadsheet that had every asset class and the data for every asset class going back to like 1929. And the thing I didn't love about Riskalyze is it goes back, 10 years, which to me wasn't even enough to mean anything. But because it integrates so well with everything, and this is part of the big, kind of migration that I made in 2015, I did choose efficiency over perfection. And to me, perfection would have been 100 years of data in that spreadsheet to show historical returns and to show, risk and volatility of the portfolio. But I basically use Riskalyze to do what I used to do with a spreadsheet, which is to show clients the risk of a portfolio and mostly to educate them and help them understand volatility.
And then literally using their tools to craft an investment policy statement.
Yes. They have a tool that helps you create an investment policy, and I like it, and it fulfills the legal requirement that we need to have to help clients, select a risk level and so forth. But my general view of risk, I think, is probably different, or at least my perception is it's a little bit different than maybe the way the industry thinks about it. I do feel that that risk is something that you can help people to understand and to accept and deal with. And that there are certain financial risks that we have to manage. Like that's why it's so important that they have enough bonds in their portfolio, to cover down markets. That's actually the financial risk of the portfolio. So that's not something that, is innate in them. That's just being smart about how much risk they can take with the portfolio. But in terms of their own ability to tolerate risk, because the way I manage money is passive, I believe that, if you have a well-diversified portfolio, over long periods of time, it's generally going to recover. And so the main risk that you're helping clients deal with is the risk of volatility in the short term. It's short-term risk. And so I use Riskalyze more as an educational tool to help clients understand what short-term risk looks like and what the worst case scenario is. But I do believe that as long as they hold that long term, that they will not lose money in the long term. They're just dealing with the short-term volatility.
And sorry, you mentioned MoneyGuide as well. So I know you said you were using eMoney for, well, originally some of the account linking, till not, and then doing some of the live planning to get, profile observations, tasks, etc. So where does MoneyGuide come in? Where does that get used?
MoneyGuide is the tool that I use to do financial planning. I do not use eMoney at all to do financial planning. I would say eMoney is the primary client vault. So it's the only thing that clients really see. It's how they interact with us, and it's how they see everything. So I really am just using eMoney for the visual login for clients. They don't have any other logins other than the custodian. And all these companies have logins. Orion has a login. I'm guessing Nitrogen has one. I don't have clients log into anything except for eMoney. And even my Orion reports feed into eMoney. So I like eMoney. I like the vault. You're probably aware, aren't you, that the MoneyGuide Pro integration allows them to actually fully see their financial plan in eMoney and to go into MoneyGuide Pro and actually integrate with and actually use it.
Yeah, well, I know MoneyGuide and eMoney did that integration years ago because they found, notwithstanding eMoney often being, I think, known as a financial planning software, there really are advisors who just use it for the vault and the client dashboard, and they wanted to use MoneyGuide for their planning. So what makes you like MoneyGuide for the planning so much? To me, then, you clearly have an intentionality to say, I already own the planning software for eMoney, but I'm not using it because I like something more over on the MoneyGuide side.
This is probably a longer conversation, but I basically built my own cash flow based financial planning software before I even started my company. When I worked for the first firm that I worked for at Penny and Schofield, they had a very elementary version of a cash flow tool in Excel, and I took it and blew it up into a very extensive Excel-based version of what eMoney is now. I only mention that because, the Excel model I built basically became a prison sentence that lasted from 2001 until 2015, when I basically hired Joel Bruckenstein to come in and help me completely change every piece of software I had. I told you I was using a spreadsheet to do what Riskalyze does.
Right.
But it basically took the integration of all these programs to convince me that there was a massive efficiency gain that I could have by moving away from all my spreadsheets. And so when I developed, basically the software palette that I currently use, it was actually with the consulting help of Joel. And he and I had known each other, all the way back to 2003 when he wrote Virtual Office Tools.
Yeah. And for those who don't know the history, like Joel Bruckenstein, who I think a lot of folks still know for being an AdvisorTech guru, he's been doing this for, I don't want to date him, like 20, 25 plus years.
Yeah.
His early days of doing technology content for advisors, he did with a partner, David Drucker, who was practicing as advisor as well, with a very tech savvy practice. And so, Drucker and Bruckenstein were together. Drucker and Bruckenstein were together on all of these things through late 90s and into the 2010s, into the 2000s and early 2010s before David ultimately retired.
Right. And I would say that my financial planning program, which I actually maintained for not only myself, but for the first firm I worked for, they maintained this investment policy spreadsheet that basically does the same thing Riskalyze does, but it went back 100 years. We had a relationship where they maintained the spreadsheet for me, and I maintained the financial planning spreadsheet for them. And the financial planning spreadsheet actually used a software program called zCalc. Have you ever heard of that, Michael?
I don't think so.
zCalc basically, I'm trying to think of the right term for it. It's a program that links in with Excel. It's like an add-in to Excel.
Okay.
And it creates a bunch of tax functions. It was more used by big estate planning firms, but it also had every single tax function in there. So when I built the spreadsheet that I'm talking about, this financial planning spreadsheet, the functionality that we built was a very, very sophisticated federal tax calculation, as well as about 5 or 6 states that we had clients in that went out like 40 years. And we used the zCalc because it had all the formulas for calculating almost every line of the federal tax. And it didn't deal with state taxes, it just dealt with federal taxes. But it made it a lot easier to actually calculate the taxes.
Okay, because so this was an Excel plugin. That's not reminded of
Yes.
Folks that built their own early Monte Carlo tools bought like Crystal Ball and some other plugins to do Monte Carlo number crunching as well. So this was in that category of
and we had Crystal Ball
library. You had Crystal Ball as well. Okay.
Yes, we had it built in. This spreadsheet was, I would say it was, I'm biased, of course, but it was probably, in my opinion, more sophisticated than Integrate. And here's the problem I had. A lot of people ask me, why didn't you sell this program? Because it was too complicated. Most financial planners, that might sound a bit arrogant, but it's not so much it was complicated. I didn't want to write the instructions to use it.
You get a certain depth in how you've made your own things. Like, this is going to take a lot of time to teach someone else how to do things that are just natural to me because I've used the software for 10 and 20 years and I built it. But
this is why I couldn't really. You ask, why didn't I grow this big firm and leverage out, and hire people? Because I didn't really want to train everyone to use these tools, and they were very time consuming. So what did I do? I attracted very large clients where I could sort of spread the cost of the depth that I was building into these spreadsheets, who it made sense to use it for. So I basically targeted my practice towards very high net worth and I would say sophisticated clients that needed this level of, financial planning.
I like how you frame that. Like, we end up making a really cool but very complex planning software. I didn't want to sell it to other advisors or higher up because then I have to train them. Instead, I just took it to affluent clients who would appreciate it and value the depth of the work that we were doing.
Right. But I mean, that might even be the story I told myself. But ultimately, what it became for me, and this is where it really took someone like Joel to kind of, smack my head against the wall and say, Chris, you got to let go of this thing. It's literally handicapping you. I mean,
So
and that was the perfectionism in me. I wanted to do these perfect financial plans. So how this gets back to the initial question you asked is, the whole thing about why do I use Money Guide Pro? Because Money Guide Pro really was the opposite side of the spectrum. When I let go of trying to do everything perfectly and use a cash flow based tool to figure out what clients were spending, it was kind of like having a vision, almost a religious vision of there's a much easier way to do this. And clients don't care about that. Most clients don't know their own cash flow. That was one of the big takeaways for me to really understand is I was forcing all my clients to try to understand their cash flow and to enter it in. But what most clients want to do is they want to focus on goals, and they just want to focus on how much do I need to save to reach a goal. And Money Guide Pro had mastered that. They had the goal planning down to a science. And yes, eMoney has migrated towards having a goal-based planning tool, but it's just, in my opinion, it's not as well developed as Money Guide Pro's.
Well, because I was going to ask, particularly if you're going back about 10 years ago to when you're dialing back on this very cash flow intensive spreadsheet, like at least then your natural alternatives would have been eMoney or Navaplan at the time,
Right.
because they were the cash flow intensive, more tax savvy tools.
Right.
So I am fascinated. Like that's not where you went.
No, I reviewed all of them. Here's the funny thing. You're going to laugh when I say this. None of them compared to my spreadsheet. And I'll tell you why.
If you have to compromise anyways, like let's just come at this from scratch.
You're going to start seeing a pattern here, and that is that I'm not very good in the gray. I'm very black and white. Look, if I'm going to give up being a perfectionist, I might as well give it fully up. But that's really kind of big part of my story is learning how to find the gray in everything. And I did feel like Money Guide Pro really did a good job of the goal-based planning. But it was a sense of freedom because so my spreadsheet was a lot easier to use than Navaplan and eMoney because I had already built everything to be ready to go. Like you sort of have to start over every time you have a new client with these programs. Even if they have defaults. My spreadsheet had all my personal defaults in it already. And we had so many side little sheets that did everything from literally multifamily properties, rental properties, college planning. They all integrated into this tool. Like I said, it was, and I still have it. And I still have ZCalc. I still have a subscription to ZCalc. And I still use it for myself. That's the only person I use it for. And it's literally I just like maintaining it. I pay ZCalc was bought out by Thomson Reuters. And I still pay like $600 or $700 a year to keep it updated, just because I like having the nostalgia of my own spreadsheet still.
Right. So what was going on in your practice that drove all this change? So I'm piecing some of this together. That I think on the one hand, what I'm hearing was the practice was kind of hitting a wall. You had manual spreadsheet for planning, manual investment policy statements that you were building. I'm assuming some pain points around portfolio performance reporting as well, because this is when you did Orion. Like you had all this tech that you completely overhauled in 2015. But then I'm going back to earlier in the conversation, and you also said if we go back a couple of years ago, like you had 30 or 40 clients. Average client was like $2 million. You had $60 million under management on your own, which maths pretty well. And there's only so much time that 30 or 40 clients consumes. So what was going on? What was the wall that you were hitting, or the stuff that was changing that made you say, I've got what frankly I think most people would view as a pretty great economics practice with a couple dozen very highly affluent clients, and you said, no, I got to torch all my technology and rebuild from scratch.
I mean, I guess it kind of starts back to the financial crash of '08. So first of all, I started my firm in Pennsylvania in '01, and I lived there for about 10 years. I had 3 kids, and in 2010, I went through a pretty brutal divorce. I'd been married about 15 years, so it was a pretty long-term marriage. And my wife moved with all the kids back to Las Vegas, which is where we're both from, where our families live. And so I moved initially to New York. Now, keep in mind, at that point, my practice, even though I had built it with clients all over the country, just the way my client base developed, it still had a lot of Pennsylvania clients. It still was a very local practice. And so in 2010, I was about 2 hours from New York. I'd always wanted to live there. So I'm single now, with no kids in the house. I started, you know, uh, going to New York City, and I started testing this idea of kind of working remotely from New York City, and then I would travel to Pennsylvania once a month and meet with all my clients. So I started structuring my meetings when I was in Pennsylvania, but I wasn't there very much.
Okay.
And that was the beginning of kind of a big change in my firm. Now, part of it was I was like, I really need to be in Las Vegas near my kids, but how am I going to move my practice across the country? I mean, who's done that? I didn't even think it was possible. And then about a year into moving and living in New York City, I actually rented an apartment on 6th Avenue. My I got custody of my youngest daughter, primary physical custody. It was kind of unexpected, to be honest. And she moved in with me. And I don't know if you have ever thought about what it would be like and how much time it would take to raise a child by yourself while you're paying child support and alimony. But it's a lot of work. And frankly, my daughter is actually adopted, the one I got custody of. She's Puerto Rican. She was adorable, and she had crazy hair. So I literally had to find someone in the building that could comb her hair every day before I took her to school, and then I would walk her to elementary school, which was about a half-hour walk from Chelsea, where I lived. And I would pick her up. I probably spent half of my day taking care of my daughter, between picking her up from school and helping her with homework and feeding her and all the things you do as a single parent. You do everything. So it really didn't leave me that much time to work. And it's fortunate that I actually had my own company. I mean, you ask what I was doing with the rest of my time. It wasn't, work. It was my family. And it's probably one of the reasons why I wasn't that involved in professional associations, why a lot of people don't know me, even though I've been around for 20 years, is that a lot of my time during these years was spent with my children, as a single parent. And so anyhow, I ended up testing out this remote working thing while I lived in New York. And I got up enough confidence because my kids were now separated from each other. My daughter was with me in New York. My ex-wife had my 2 older kids who were teenagers in Las Vegas. And I'm from Vegas. And then, we're dealing with the financial crash of '08. So, I was in New York 2009, 2010. And then my dad got cancer in 2010, terminal skin cancer. Yeah, it was crazy how many things happened during this period of time. If you talk about a low point in my life, this is it. And then I decided to move to Vegas because I wanted to be closer to my family and close to my dad before he died. We knew he was going to die. I mean, he was stage 4. So I basically am like, I don't care what the cost is. I'm just going to move my company. And I don't know how I'm going to make it work, but I'm going to figure it out. So I moved to Las Vegas in 2011 from New York City with no clients really on the West Coast. And that's when I began really trying to figure out how to run a practice from across the country. And I pretty much had to start over in every way. I had to, even though I'm from Vegas, I had to go out and reconnect with everyone that I hadn't seen in, 15 years. And it was quite the experience trying to rebuild, my networks.
I mean, did you leave clients behind? I mean, did you lose them?
No.
Did you?
So here's what I did.
Yeah.
I told you I sort of perfected this process in New York of driving into Pennsylvania pretty frequently to meet with clients. And I started preparing them about 6 months before. Hey, I'm probably going to be relocating across the country. How do you feel about that? And just sort of talking to everyone and getting their thoughts. How can I serve you from across the country and make this work? And there was only really a few clients that basically said, there's just no way I could see this working. One of them happened to be my largest client, who at the time was worth about 300 million, and I managed 20 million of my 60 million was under his management. The revenue wasn't quite a third, but it was probably a quarter of my revenue. And I knew I wasn't going to be able to keep him. We met weekly, and he wanted someone local, and so that's the
when you're
thing.
meeting weekly and you're that immersed
Yeah,
in his financial life.
yeah, exactly. So I knew that I was going to lose some clients, and I really didn't lose very many, but I lost a few really big ones. But that was just the price I knew I had to pay to restructure things. And so, so I moved to Vegas, and what I did is I committed to come back several times a year and meet with everybody during those few trips. And that was when the beginning of how my firm developed into what it is today happened. Is I figured out how to work with, and again, I didn't have a lot of clients to begin with, right? I already had a pretty small practice. So I figured out a way to meet with everybody that wanted to meet face to face during a few trips of the year. And that's what I did. And then the other thing I did in Las Vegas is I began completely, rebuilding my firm. And it's almost like starting over. When you move, you have to rebuild all your centers of influence. You have to, you have to go out and market and do things that, to get started again. So it was a pretty big change. And then the fintech revolution happened a few years after I moved to Vegas.
And so I've got questions on two directions here. Like what you did like to get clients is you had to rebuild, but let me come back to that because I'm still kind of curious for what actually drove your 2015 fintech revolution. Like what
Right.
actually drove you to say, okay, I got to rip all this stuff out in place?
Yeah, what drove me was I'm trying to think there were all these pain points because I was still like, when I actually have a chart right in front of me of my AUM, and between 2000, my AUM dropped from 50 million in 2010, or it was like 55 million down to 32 million in 2011, the year I moved to Vegas. And from there on, it grew very slowly. And I think by 2015, it was up maybe 10 million. So I was at like 40 million. I still wasn't even back to where I was in 2015. I had retained a lot of clients, but they would slowly drop off. Like every year I'd lose a couple from Pennsylvania, and I wasn't growing fast enough in Vegas to recover. And so I think the trigger was I saw the potential for all the software integration to make my firm really efficient, and the ability to work with, again, higher end compliance that were maybe lower on the asset side. So I think I saw the potential of that, and I saw the potential to be a lot more efficient. And I just saw the only way to achieve that was to wholesale shift. And I think it would be helpful to know what I moved from and to. We've talked about what my current software base is, but let me tell you how I was operating then and what I migrated from. So back then we had servers and desktops, right?
Right.
So I had a whole server system, and I had a physical office with an employee, and with, it was a traditional setup. And I had interns. I probably had 1 to 2 interns every year, as well as a full-time admin. And we all had desktops that connected to a server. So I went from that to just having a laptop in the cloud with ShareFile. I went from ProTracker. You remember Warren?
Yeah, absolutely. Remember Warren Atkinson?
In fact, kind of a fun fact here. At one point, Warren wanted to hire me to run ProTracker, which I'm glad I turned down, because that was definitely not going to last through the fintech revolution. So I moved from ProTracker to Redtail. By the way, that was a very hard transition. I loved ProTracker, Redtail is but Redtail was the top integration CRM at the time. So I moved from Portfolio Center to Orion. Imagine how different it was going from ProTracker, where you did all of your own reconciliations, to Orion doing it all for you, costing like 10 times more. The cost difference, we're talking, I went from like the lowest cost technology ever, to, I went from 5,000 a year to like 40,000 a year, pretty much overnight. And then I had all my own spreadsheets that were free. And, I migrated to MoneyGuide, Riskalyze, eMoney, TRX. I did all the rebalancing before using Portfolio Center reports and Excel spreadsheets.
Yep. I remember those days. That was our prior firm as well, running on Portfolio Center, doing our daily downloads and
I know,
dumping data into Excel spreadsheets to calculate rebalancing.
So what I was doing during that time, I would say the first 3 years I was in Vegas, I joined the Chamber of Commerce had a leadership program there called Leadership Las Vegas. That was very time consuming. So a lot of my time was spent marketing, connecting with people, trying to build my brand, build my company and my name. And then in 2015, when I migrated the software, it was about a 1 to 2 year process. I mean, I did it all at one time, but it's a lot of work. And
Yep.
most people don't migrate everything at once. They do it in pieces.
Yep.
That's not really the way I roll. I tend to just knock it all out. It's like a clean slate. So I did it all within about 6 months, but it took a while to rebuild all of my systems and tools and everything. I mean, my entire manual, like I had a little written office manual or whatever, how to do everything for an employee. That literally became completely worthless. I might as well have just picked it up and thrown it in the garbage. It was completely useless. That's how radical the change was. But once I got everything set up and I got my reporting and everything reconfigured in all the software, I can't even begin to describe to you the efficiencies that I started experiencing, and it completely changed my firm. I had a person that had been with me since 2011. She was with me actually for 10 years before my wife ended up taking over her job. But she was with me, and she was training. We had an internship program, so she was training, interns that were working with me. And one of those interns I hired as a full-time employee right during this process. And as soon as I finished the whole thing, he was like, "Well, this is great. I'm going to start doing paraplanning work for you." And I remember sitting with him one day. I felt so bad. Really nice kid. His name was Seth. He actually went to, some of my other interns came from UVU, but he was from UNLV. And I said, "Seth, I don't know how to tell you this, but I don't need a paraplanner." And this is when I was starting to realize I actually had no role for a paraplanner.
Because you didn't have to maintain the time-consuming spreadsheet anymore, and the tech was strong enough that you could just steer it in the planning meeting yourself.
Exactly. Once I created the new system, I realized I didn't have to enter data anymore into a spreadsheet. All of my data in eMoney flowed right into Money Guide Pro. Once you set all that up, it's literally an autopilot. I mean, I was able to work with much smaller clients and be profitable because I didn't have to enter data for everybody into a spreadsheet every single year.
So what happened next as you did the tech rebuild and then got your feet under you with tech again?
Yeah. What happened next, you can only imagine. Tremendous growth like I had never experienced. I mean, this was 2015. I was now 14 years into my business. I had 43 million under management. I actually have a spreadsheet in front of me that literally shows kind of pre-2015 kind of growth rate, new clients per year, and from 2015 to 23 growth rate. And it's like I have two different businesses, one that ran from 2001 to 2015 and one from that point on. My AUM, I think from that point on went from 43 million to 110 million in like 8 years. And that's with maybe adding 30 clients.
And so where were clients coming from? Or I guess what made this suddenly a magical growth firm for you in a way that it hadn't been previously?
Well, first, I was able to start working with clients I couldn't work with before because they weren't profitable. So like I mentioned, I started working with a doctor who was a young doctor, high-income doctor. He referred me to a lot of other doctors all over the country that were friends of his. So there was a lot of organic growth from being able to help people that were being underserved. At that time, they were being heavily underserved by our business. I think you guys in the XY Planning Network who have done a great job serving that community I don't know where you were at that point, but I'm guessing that was the early infancy for you guys too.
Yeah, very early on. XY Planning Network, which was founded around doing subscription models for working folks in their 30s, 40s, and 50s, that launched in April of 2014. Exactly. And was just taking on its first 50 advisors that year. It didn't really start growing until the next 2 years. So there was almost no presence for it when you started doing this yourself.
Right. Yeah, and it's the same kind of thing. I mean, that's what's so, I think, exciting when we look back is that for me, I also was kind of frustrated that it was hard to work with people kind of my own age that I had, age similarities to, and that I could socially, maybe do stuff with. So it was really exciting. So in 2015, my average client ac- acquisition per year before was maybe 2 or 3 people a year. I was, like I said, I worked with pretty large clients that I brought on slowly over those years. Starting in 2015, I added 7 clients in 2015. In 2016, I added 13. 2017, I added 7. 17, I added 7. 2019, I added 8. So it probably doubled or tripled my kind of new client acquisitions. And, some of these clients were still pretty large. I've always, I think, been attractive to really nerdy, kind of, I guess you could say, engineering types. I have a lot of engineering clients that, and the older ones do have significant assets, or ones that are close to retiring from, Boeing,
Right.
or from Air Products or places like that. So, analytical people tend to, I think, like me. And then, of course, referrals to, whoever. Um, so, and I think there is just a randomness to how you grow, but I've always grown heavily through word of mouth. But I think the other thing for me, and I don't want to go into this too much, but I had a really strong web presence. I was pretty solid with social media. And I also had I had a lot of content on my website. So I had every newsletter going back to like 2001 on there. Um, I had a lot of content that drove, I think, a lot of Google. Like, I ranked high on the Google searches, and so I did start getting a lot of clients from the web, from social media, and my Google rankings were pretty high.
And was that built around like serving engineers or serving retirees? Was there a particular specialization, or was this more locally driven in people searching for a financial advisor near me in Las Vegas?
It was pretty much, around. Most of my clients that weren't coming through social media were coming through referrals. And I think one thing we haven't talked about much is my previous career. That did play a pretty big role in how my original client base grew. And during this time, so I was a strategy consultant for a firm called Monitor Company, which was eventually bought by Deloitte. But I mention it because a lot of my early clients were actually consultants or their parents. A lot of them referred me to their parents. And I helped build the corporate finance practice at a major consulting firm. So I had a very high level of trust with a lot of the consultants who would refer me to their parents. And so I had kind of a national client base pretty early on. And around this time, a lot of my consulting friends who went into private equity, and most of them went into, finance, or, you know, or they own businesses or whatnot, a lot of them started hiring me. They had started hitting a point where they had wealth. And so it was sort of a weird combination of just, that kind of coming back around for me. And then just a lot of referrals within my client base to people they knew.
So how do you think about growth and I guess like goals at this point? Are you still trying to grow? Do you feel like you're at capacity?
During my peak season, I work about 20 to 25 hours a week. And my goal is to keep my hours about the same, but to continue to grow strategically. Um, during the summer months when I'm traveling, I work about 10 to 15 hours a week, because during those months, I'm not doing near as many client meetings, and I'm mostly just maintaining people's investments and answering questions as they come up, but it's not a super heavy workload. Again, because I have an established client base, and because I only take on one to two new clients a year, the way that I'm mostly growing is through working with larger and larger clients. And it's the same amount of work generally to onboard a big client as it is a small client. Sometimes it can actually be more work to work with a small client, especially if they're a business owner. So I work mostly with retirees, and that's another part about my business. I do think working with retirees, it's easier to develop an efficient business. It's frankly just a lot more work to work with business owners. And so I generally don't work with that type of client. Not because, and I have a few, but it's just not, it's for me, you know, I think happiness for me is not having stress, and business owners can often be very stressful to work with.
Right.
So it's not that I don't want to help them. I just don't think I'm the right type of person to help them.
So I'm assuming there's still some small natural amount of attrition as well. People die,
Yes.
people move, life circumstances change. So if you're taking on sort of
Hmm.
intentionally one or two new clients, I'm assuming that means that total client base essentially is just trying to stay flat and even here, but AUM and revenue grow because you're intentionally trying to focus on larger clients when you bring on new people. So you lose an average client on average, and you take on an above average client, and
That's
over time the
exactly.
practice continues to
Yeah.
grow. But you don't have to add total client count, which means you don't have to add total head count.
Yeah. When I do bring on new clients, they're generally a lot bigger than the ones that I'm losing. And I don't lose clients often to reasons other than death. Occasionally I do, but usually there's a reason. Um, and so, yeah, I mean, I feel like, there are years where I'll take on more than two or three. It's very much opportunistic the way I approach it. If someone's a good fit and I want to work with them, it's not even about how big they are. It's about whether they're a good fit for my client base. And I think in terms of capacity, I do think right now I'm at about 68. I think I could comfortably work with 90 to 100. I don't know what the exact number is, but a lot of the reason I can work with even that many is because so many of them are almost in maintenance mode. Because especially later in retirement, it isn't as much work to work with clients.
Okay. And just you spent so much time
Right.
investing in the relationship for 5, 10 plus years. Just there, I've
Yeah.
always observed this comes a point with a lot of very long-term clients where early on we're doing the regular meetings. Part is for
Hmm.
more active planning as life changes, and part is just continuing to invest in the relationship. And there comes a point where the trust is so good that clients like, hey, I'll call you if I've got a thing going on, and you call me if there's a thing going on. But short of that, like we just really don't need to meet. Like I totally trust you, and
Yeah.
we'll talk when there's something to talk about.
Yeah, and I can honestly say that, I mean, with as small as my client base is, I mean, I feel like I could reach to my phone and call any of my clients just out of the blue and be like, "Hey, how's it going?" I mean, I really have a pretty close friendship with every one of them. I mean, there might be a few that don't fall in that camp, but once they've been with me for that long, 5 or 10 years, you build a pretty deep relationship, and a lot of that relationship is built in the first couple of years. And then as time goes on, you don't need to spend as much time. But I'm also very uh, easy to reach. And so I think there's a really high confidence level that they always know if they need anything, they can call me. And so, and I'm not super big on appearing like I care. I'm not big on sending birthday cards because it's their birthday or sending out emails on holidays just to touch them. I prefer to just call them on the phone and be like, "Hey, how you doing?" I'd rather have a personal touch point than one that's automated and meaningless.
So, I've got to ask though, a lot of advisory firms, you grow through referrals, would like to get more sizable multi-million dollar clients through referrals,
Hmm.
and just don't.
Hmm.
Like that's not who comes through.
Hmm.
You seem to be getting a pretty steady flow of them, enough that you can have the practice move up over time
Yeah.
because you're replacing average clients with new above average multi-million dollar clients. So do you have a sense like what's leading to you being more referable than a lot of other advisors who just aren't getting those called upper market referrals the way that you are?
Well, a lot of my referring clients are huge influencers within their communities. I have clients who are presidents of universities. A lot of these were former consulting friends, partners at major consulting firms. They're people that other people look up to, and they're very influential within their social circles. So I do think it is hard to replicate that. I don't know how to replicate it even myself. I think that's one advantage I have, because even in the beginning of my career, my early clients, my very first client was 2 million. I've always been able to bring in large clients even from the early years. And I think it's just the nature of, you know, my comfort level with, working with certain types of clients that I I'm comfortable with it. And so those people that are influential with it within their social groups, those are the ones referring. It's a very small percent of my clients that really refer me, the bulk of these clients. The other thing I want to say is that I think most of my asset growth right now is coming from within my existing client base. A lot of people who are retiring or they're rolling over IRAs. Some of my biggest asset growth has been clients saving, very high income clients saving large amounts of money every year. I have quite a few clients that are high income that will save $500,000 a year. And so even though I actually have a lot of retired clients, the ones that I have that are working tend to be in the high income bracket where they're saving a lot of money.
And that was part of your intentional shift to say, I'm going to have a minimum planning fee that runs alongside my asset fee so that I can
Yes.
serve some of these
Yes.
younger, high income, upwardly mobile folks because I want a more age
Yeah.
diversified, accumulator diversified client base. And now that you're 8, 9 years into that strategy, it's paying off.
Yes. I do think for firms who strategically chose to only target basically wealth that already had been accumulated, like close to retirement people or retirees, I think the downside of that strategy is that generally those people are distributing as they
Right.
retire, right? So you've got to have both sides. You've got to balance the current kind of, high net worth clients that you can draw a larger fee off of with working with younger clients who have that potential and that may even get there very quickly. That's the part that surprised me the most, was how fast these high income clients grew. I mean, I have one doctor who has gotten to be one of my 5 largest clients in less than 4 years.
So it sounds like part of the key in that context. I feel like a lot of advisors make quote unquote accommodations for clients that are smaller than their usual or below a minimum
Yeah.
because we say, hey, this person can accumulate and be upwardly mobile.
Hmm.
But I guess to me, part of the takeaway of what you're highlighting is, yeah, but like that doesn't have to be a, hey, it seems like they're young and savers, maybe in 10 or 15 years they'll add up to be a good client. It's like, no. If you're really working with some
Yeah.
higher income saver accumulation oriented folks, like they could be a sweet spot client in 2 or 3 years and a top client in
Yes.
4.
Yeah, the people that I make exceptions for now, if they're below 2 million, they're either a very strategic person in the community that I'm trying to, integrate into, or they have to be someone who's saving, 300,000 or 400,000 a year. I mean, the standard I have for kind of, if you're at a 500,000 or a million, which is way below what I'm targeting, then I've really got to see tremendous savings potential, not 50 to 100,000 a year.
So
But
as you reflect back on this path,
mhm.
what's been the most surprising thing to you about building the advisory business?
um, Almost like what we were just talking about, just how I was very, very scared early on that, I was so young. I was 28 when I started. In fact, I didn't have the CFP yet. I had met all the requirements for it, but I had the 3-year experience requirement, still had a year and a half left. So I thought, why would anyone trust a 28-year-old with $1 million? And I think what was surprising for me, it kind of is like the Kevin Costner statement in Field of Dreams, if you build it, they will come. But I do think that surprised me the most is that I was able to actually kind of step into the unknown by starting a firm with no clients, and no revenue. And I was able to attract clients and build a company. And once you get a taste of that, I think it's very hard to ever go back.
So what's been the biggest challenge for you to navigate through this journey?
Um, that whole period I mentioned back in 2009 to 2011, where basically the market crashed. So my assets were down, 40% for 1 to 2 years, lost a $20 million client, went through a divorce, uh, took on being a single father, and then my dad passing away, all within about 2 years. And then having to kind of reinvent myself in Las Vegas, and eventually, was able to come out of all of it. But kind of what I took away from all that was that, it's not sort of what happens to you in life that really matters. It's how you respond to it. And the best way I think to respond to those kind of events is to just dive in and focus on the future instead of dwelling on the past. It's easy to get stuck in, the victim mindset, like, why did this happen to me? But I think the key is, I think, to focus on what you love and what you're passionate about. And, I tried to do that during that period, and you know, I was able to get through that.
So are there other parts like you you know now and wish you could go back and like tell you from back then, give advice to younger Chris from where you are today?
Yeah, not sure younger Chris would have been able to appreciate it because he thought he knew everything. Um, but I mean, I think that's part of the irony of learning. And one of the things I guess I've learned as even a parent is the way most people learn is through failing, and then hopefully when you fail, you learn from that failure. But if I was open to listening back then, I probably would have wanted my younger self to know the importance of letting go of perfection. I think that's the big takeaway for me in life. Perfectionism, has benefits, but it can be a jail sentence, like with my software stuff. And so I kind of learned that I really had to outsource anything that I was either really perfectionistic about or inefficient. And so today I hire people to do everything that I get stuck on. You know, I can be very OCD about things, and so I don't do anything that triggers that. And so I try to either use software or I basically hire out that sort of stuff.
All right, so I've got to ask. Like, I feel like for maybe again, I'm channeling too much myself here, but like the things I get perfectionist about are the things
Hmm.
that are the hardest for me
Hmm.
to outsource and delegate and let go of, because
Hmm.
no one can do that as well as I
Yeah.
do. Right? Like
Yes.
I would delegate the things I'm not as concerned about whether it's perfect, because good enough
Hmm.
is good enough.
Hmm.
So I'm fascinated by this. Like, no, the things that you were getting that you feel the most perfectionism about are the things that you most try to let go of. How does
Yeah.
that work, and how do you get comfortable with that?
Well, I'll try to give you some examples. The software is the biggest thing. We've talked through all that, right? Most of letting go of all my own software tools and using the quote canned software that we all use now, that integrates. It was a choice over efficiency, right? Efficiency versus having the perfect cash flow model that gives you the right answer. And part of it is just knowing materially, does that small, better result have an impact in the client's result? I think I came to realize that it's more about ballparking things, not about having the right answer. Um, and so that helped me a lot to kind of let go of it if I could see a reason, you know. And then part of it is just, again, with my personality, I get stuck on things. When I was in college, all of my recommendations actually came from writing professors. And the thing I hated more than anything was writing. But I actually did very well in writing because I wanted the A, right? So I would write and rewrite and end up with the perfect paper that these professors would keep and use for future classes. But I absolutely hated writing. In fact, I tried to find a career that involved no writing, because it was such a pain point for me. And even that, ironically, I have outsourced. I found a firm that has my same identical investment philosophy that does and writes all of my quarterly letters. For any of my clients that might be listening to this, they're going to find this out. They probably think I write them all. But I basically start with a template from another firm for my quarterly letter, and then I modify it to fit. I make some small changes to it to reflect all of my views. But for the most part, it's ghostwritten by another firm, and that's because it's a pain point for me. Not because I'm not good at it, but because I know that I will sit and, kind of stress over it. And and my goal in life is to be happy. So
So, what advice would you give to just younger, newer advisors looking to navigate the navigate the profession today and coming in as a financial advisor?
I think it's a hard question because again, everyone's different. And for someone who gives advice for a living, I've definitely come to appreciate the fact that the more I learn, the less I know. So, I mean, I think the best advice is just try to soak up everything you can and try to get a lot of different perspectives, which is, why your podcast I think is so valuable, Michael, is hearing different people's perspective. But, if their goal is to own their own firm, I would encourage them to work for a smaller firm where they can understand how everything works. I only worked for a small company for about a year, but I learned everything I had to learn in terms of how to run my own company. And then, you know, you use the community, like the XY Planning Network or other communities, to fill in those gaps. Um, And then the other advice I'd give is don't stay too long at one firm. If you are working for a firm, you can learn almost everything you need to learn at a firm, I think, in 1 to 2 years. I don't think you should be there any longer than that unless you want to stay there forever. And I do think in the early years, advisors should work for 2 or 3 different companies to learn different ways of approaching it before they go off on their own.
So as we come to the end, this is a podcast about success, and just one of the themes that comes up is even that word success means different things to different people. Sometimes it changes for us through our own lives and careers. And so, as someone who's running what anyone would objectively call a very successful $100+ million practice, the business is in a wonderful place now. How do you define success for yourself at this point?
Well, for me, I've never defined success as an AUM target. That's really never even been on my radar. It's always been for me about finding, I guess, my version of happiness, which for me is defined mostly as not worrying quite as much. Hard to do because I have a lot of anxiety. It's probably what makes me a good advisor. But I mean, aside from that, enjoying my life is a big part of what I define as success. But even enjoying the process of working on goals, creating new ones. It's not, to me, success isn't really a destination. It's a lifestyle. And so, for me, success is really about getting up after you fall. It's about reinventing yourself, constantly changing, improving, and just enjoying the journey.
You make a striking point to me that there's sort of this effect that the anxiety and conscientiousness we have to make sure that clients are served well often makes us a good advisor, and also makes it really hard to let go of the business and the client work and stop worrying and live our own lives, because it's really easy to get sucked into that. Against it can make us a good advisor. It can also make enjoyment of life a little bit difficult at the same time. So I'm struck just by how you're trying to, I guess, create some lines for yourself about what's good enough to serve clients really well, and then just lets us worry a little bit less and enjoy our own lives more.
Yeah, for sure. It is hard finding that balance. And I found with having anxiety, I mean, I don't notice it as much personally as other people seem to notice it around me. Like, Chris, you seem worried. No, that's just the way I am. To me, that's normal. But then there are times when I notice the anxiety, and whether I'm worrying about, revenue dropping, or I'm, worried about something. One thing that's helped me with that over the years is to just remind myself it's just money. If I can find a way to quantify something into dollars, I know that I can solve the problem pretty easily, And so, yeah, it is hard though to find that healthy balance. And so I think it's one of the reasons why I could never work for someone, because I'd be too concerned all the time about making them happy or meeting their needs, instead of trying to find a healthy balance, which I think I can find better when I am only accountable to myself.
I like that. It's easier to find a better balance when I'm only accountable to myself.
Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, thank you so much, Chris, for joining us on the Financial Advisor Success Podcast.
Well, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Want even more ideas, tools, and resources on how to break through to the next level of success as a financial advisor? Check out the leading financial planning industry blog, Nerd's Eye View, at www.kitsis.com, where Michael covers the latest practice management trends and financial planning strategies. And by joining the members section, you can earn IMCA and CFP continuing education credits, along with exclusive member content. Get it all now at www.kitsis.com.